Driving, the 1979 classic from Pearl Harbor and the Explosions. The band's self-titled debut album will be re-released soon this spring. Pearl Harbor is with me now to talk about that and a lot more. Welcome to Revenge of the 80s Radio, Pearl.
Oh, hi, Chris. Glad to be here.
I'm very glad to have you here. Now, Pearl, the Explosions might have produced your biggest chart hits and maybe where you're most well known, but it really was, putting it all in perspective, a very small blip to a very interesting musical career.
Yes, I guess that's true, yes.
I would say. So let's start from the beginning. You were of an army family, from what I understand. And how much did you have to travel around?
I traveled around my entire young life. My father did retire in the 60s, but he stayed working for the Army. So from the day I was born in Fort Ord, Monterey, California, and then we immediately, 6 months after I was born, we moved to Germany, and we stayed there for most of my young life. I lived there till I was 17, and then I left Munich, Germany. I lived in Frankfurt, Stuttgart, Heidelberg, and Munich. And I left Munich in 1973 to come to San Francisco. And I just came on my own. I'd never been to San Francisco and never lived in the United States, except when I was very young. I lived in Arizona from, I think, 3 years old to 6 years old, something like that.
So you were pretty much exposed to a lot of interesting culture in Germany, and you did have a lot of, and of course, being American, you had the American culture, so you crossed all that along. What brought you to San Francisco, of all cities, though?
Well, my father, we always listened to AFN, Armed Forces Network, so we always were aware of the American music scene. I always wanted to be a singer ever since I was a little girl. And I used to imitate Ronnie Spector and stand in front of the mirror and pretend I was one of the Ronettes. So when I moved to San Francisco, I just had an idea that it was probably one of the most interesting places in the United States because my dad used to get Time and Life magazine, and all the hippie movement was really thriving, the whole Haight-Ashbury scene and all that. And it was in all the magazines because I guess it was so, it was newsworthy. And so I just wanted to go, I guess I just thought San Francisco was really interesting and really wild, and that's what I was looking for.
And they did build quite the new wave punk scene there too. So you were pretty much at home, I guess, or you found a home there, if you will.
Well, when I moved here in 1973, I did leave my parents and came here alone. So I immediately started going to all the rock concerts, and I really loved the Tubes. I think I first saw them in 1975. And I wanted to be in that band because it was like a real rock and roll circus. There were people dancing and just all kinds of shenanigans were happening. And I thought it was the most fun, rock show I'd ever seen. So I wanted to be in the Tubes. And then I sort of lucked out in 1976. They had a Tubes talent hunt, and I won their talent hunt by tap dancing. I made a boxing outfit, and so I was a shadow boxing tap dancer, and so then the prize was that I got to dance with the Tubes, and then I really got along with them, and so then they asked me if I would, sing and dance with them for California shows. So I never went on the road with them except throughout California. So yeah, that was my main reason, for joining the Tubes, was that that was my dream, is that I wanted to be in a rock band.
A shadow boxing tap dancer, or is it a tap dancing shadow boxer? But that's an interesting combination. No wonder the Tubes wanted to hire you. You also became a snake afterward, too, or during that time, if you will.
Yes. Leland the Snakes was a band. When I first joined, it was an all-girl band. but it was the dancing girls from the Tubes, and Leela was a woman named Jane Doorknocker, and she wrote "Don't Touch Me There" with another guy, which is one of the Tubes' best songs. And she did have this band that played locally all the time. And so during my time of dancing with the Tubes, she asked me if I wanted to join Leela and the Snakes too. So I hooked up with her in 1976, as well as the Tubes.
Pearl Harbor is with me on Revenge of the 80s radio. So now we have a shadowboxing, tap dancing snake. You got the big combination there, Pearl. It's perfect. Brilliant.
I know. Well, it was really fun because I got to do all these things. Like I sang while pogo sticking, hula hooping, tap dancing. I got to sort of live out all my my dreams regarding being as crazy as possible on stage, and it was really fun.
What experiences and savvy did you pick up while working with the Tubes and working with Leela and the Snakes to bring to your own band, Pearl Harbor and the Explosions, when you formed it?
Well, I did really learn a lot from Jane, from Leela, Jane Doorknocker. She was at least 10 years older than me, and she was, a well-seasoned performer, and she taught me all kinds of things like, when you first get on stage, the first thing you want to do is make everybody smile. And once you make everybody smile, then you've sort of got them, and they're paying attention. And that's something that I've never forgotten because it's true. And I've always had a sense of humor with my lyrics and my performances, always. So that's the main thing I learned from her. And then, of course, I learned all my hair and makeup tricks from the Tubes girls, because they were all, really good at, doing all stage makeup. And there was a drag queen, Doris Fish, who, taught me a lot about hair and makeup as well. So, and that's always been a big part of my look and act too, is big hair and a lot of makeup and a funny performance, and I've just stuck to that my whole career, actually.
Pearl Harbor of Pearl Harbor and the Explosions is with me on Revenge of the 80s radio. It's always good to bring the experiences from your earlier days in performance to the later ones, and I mean, I've done that. I mean, there's so many things I learned from my first radio job that I still bring with me today. And you put together a great lineup of musicians, which would become one of your MOs later on in life as well. We had Peter Built on a bunch of years back. Peter Dunn now. Tell us about the Pearl Harbor and the Explosions lineup.
John and Hillary Stench, that's what Leela named them, and their names are in fact John and Hillary Haynes. So they're brothers that were John plays drums still, and Hillary plays bass. And so when the drummer for Leela and the Snakes quit, she hired John, and then soon after that, he brought in his brother, Hillary. So John and Hillary and I were all in Leela and the Snakes. And then there was a time when, because we were a very popular local band, because our show was very visual, and so we were the support act to a lot of great bands that would come into town. They would always hire Leela and the Snakes to be the support act. So, like for Mink DeVille, Elvis Costello, Graham Parker and the Rumor. Actually, Graham Parker and the Rumor I'd already started with Pearl Harbor and the Explosions. But when John and Hillary and I were in Leela and the Snakes, and we were being the support act to all these great bands, we sort of were always saying to each other, it would be great if we could start our own band, and it wouldn't be comedy and it wouldn't be cabaret, but it would be, more like a regular band. And so the three of us quit Leela and the Snakes at the same time and formed Pearl Harbor and the Explosions. And Peter was a friend of John's, and so he said, I have a great guitar player that, I want to work with. So we brought Peter in, and that was it.
Pearl, the band only lasted one album. What happened? It looked like the group had a lot of potential.
It did have a lot of potential, and those three guys, John, Hillary, and Peter, are great musicians. And Warner Brothers sunk a lot of dough into our act, and they were very, very angry when we broke up. And the reason why we broke up was because John and Hillary and Peter were very interested in like jazz fusion and different kinds of fusion music that, quite frankly, I didn't like at all. And so when we were writing the our the album, um, Pearl Harbor and the Explosions album, there was a lot of bickering going on because I was interested in rock and roll and they weren't. So it was all musical differences basically. So after the first album, and we toured behind it, and we did some great tours like with the 3 months with the Talking Heads and the B-52s, and we, like I said, we played with all kinds of great bands like Graham Parker and the Rumor, Nick Lowe. Gosh, I can't even think anymore. The Clash.
Yeah, the Clash, definitely the
We played
Clash.
with we played with so many great bands, and whenever I was together with the English bands, I would always say to them, you know, I really like rockabilly. This was way before the Stray Cats or anything, and rockabilly was kind of unheard of. And all the English bands used to say, well, there's a really big rockabilly scene in London, and you know, you should move there. And then I had an English boyfriend who worked with the Clash and Ian Dury and the Blockheads, and he said the same thing, you know, that I should move out there. And so I left the Explosions and moved to London to pursue rockabilly.
Pearl Harbor of Pearl Harbor and the Explosions is with us on Revenge of the 80s Radio. We're going to talk about the re-release of the 1980 album later on, Pearl's post-Explosions work, and what she's doing today. Straight ahead on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Everything's Boring But My Baby, a solo track from Pearl Harbor on Revenge of the 80s Radio. That's from her first solo album in 1980's Don't Follow Me, I'm Lost Too, which pretty much could be the motto for almost anybody listening today. Pearl Harbor's with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Your solo work did not seem to get a fair shake with the record company suits. Yet the first album, Don't Follow Me, I'm Lost Too, did not only feature your talents, you put together quite the all-star band.
I did, but thank you for saying that. The Warner Brothers did not promote it because number one, they did not like the album, and number two, all it was the musicians that were playing on Don't Follow Me, I'm Lost Too were all the members of the Clash except for Joe Strummer. Paul Simonon played bass on every track, and Topper Headon played drums along with Steve Goulding from Graham Parker and the Rumor. So I had two drummers, and that was because I'd seen Gary Glitter and Adamant, and they both had two drummers, and I really liked the big fat sound that they had. So that's why I had two drummers. And then I also had Nigel Dixon from Whirlwind, this really cool rockabilly band. And then I had Steve New, who was in the Rich Kids. And then Wilco Johnson, who was in Ian Dury and the Blockheads and Dr. Feelgood. So yes, that was a great lineup. But Warner Brothers were mad at me because I actually made a really big mistake. I listened to Cosmo, who was my boyfriend at the time, and he was working with the Clash and Ian Dury. So that's how I met all those folks. And it was kind of a punk rock decision to not mention all the famous players because we were slightly concerned that that all the press would say would concentrate on the fact that it was all members of the Clash and the Blockheads, and sort of like say that, well, I don't know how to put this, but they might say, well, the success of this album is not due to Pearl Harbor, but due to all these musicians. And so instead, I was advised to not list any of the musicians, which I regret to this day. But it really upset Warner Brothers that I did that, and so they basically threw me off the label, and they did not promote the record, and they only printed up. I don't know, not a couple thousand copies, if that, and like I said, they didn't promote it, and they wouldn't support me to go on tour or anything. So it kind of was a big disaster. Because at that time, hanging out with Ian Dury and the Blockheads and the Clash, they were all rebels, and it worked for them. But I wanted to be a rebel too, and and it didn't work for me.
Well, it depends on what the suits said, I guess. Sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes they're a little antsy about things if you want to try something different. I know they want to try the big names sometimes, and they want to throw that stuff around, but a lot of times you have that little anonymity, and every once in a while, let the DJs leak out who's in the band. It kind of piques the interest, and all of a sudden, everything falls together. That could have been the good way to do it, but then again, I'm not an industry suit. I'm here doing the radio thing, and there's probably a good reason for that. One of my life lessons also is always trust a guy whose name is Cosmo. That's always good. And the guy in the movies who's leaning against the wall with his foot up a little bit, flipping that quarter, saying, "Psst, hey, mister, come here." That's another guy I always listen to. Those are my great career decisions in life. So that's a different story for a different day. But the album should have gotten some airtime and should have gotten better attention from the suits there. And I understand from what you're saying why. But you do have a story behind Everything's Boring But My Baby.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's boring but my baby. I wrote, that was the first song I wrote by myself as a solo artist. And I was trying to write a song that obviously is not rockabilly, but it was, I was trying to write a song that was very, let's see here, I guess Phil Spector-ish, sort of that era, of the girl groups era. So that's why that song is sounds like it does. It was because it was my interpretation of a girl group sound. So I really like that song, by the way. Everybody's boring but my baby, but it never did anything, and it never got any airplay or anything like that. But I'm glad you like it.
Sometimes it's politics. If you were there a year later, you could have just released a video and let MTV viewers decide. That usually worked in the early '80s, but this
Oh,
was
I
done in '80. This
know.
was '80. It was different.
Exactly. There was no MTV when I was on Warner Brothers, so they couldn't milk my image or anything like that. So as a result, they decided not to milk me at all.
Pearl Harbor with me on Revenge of the '80s Radio. You did tour with The Clash for a while before recording new solo material, and I understand that did quite well in Japan. Big in Japan, I might say, since I've been on a 2-week quoting Alphaville kick.
Yes, I did do well in Japan, and a lot of my success in Japan is actually due to the Clash, because they went for the first and only time in 1982. And at that point, I was married to Paul Simonon, so we got married in '82. So I went on stage with them in Tokyo and sang Fujiyama Mama, and so that really got to the whole Japanese crowd, and so I owe it to the Clash, really, that I'm so popular in Japan still to this day, because they kind of consider me to be sort of you know part of Clash history, I suppose. So they really respect that and love that. So I kind of lucked out in that department.
Pearl, another all-star band backed you in your 1995 Here Comes Trouble album.
Right?
I gotta ask, how have you been able to keep getting these stellar names to play with you over the years?
That's a good question that I don't know the answer to. I guess I have some sort of street credibility or something. But because, like when I was in London, I got, to work with the Clash and the Blockheads because of Cosmo. And then after that album, I also was able to put together really great bands to play live because obviously the Clash and Blockheads couldn't play live with me. So I got, some of their little brothers, like Paul Simonon's little brother was my drummer. Davey Payne, the sax player from the Blockheads, his little brother was my bass player. And then Steve New and Nigel Dixon, they stuck with me, and that was basically our band. We also had two drummers when we played live, and my other drummer was Blair Cunningham, who, after he played with me, he went on to play with the Pretenders and then Paul McCartney. And I don't know who he's played with after that. I sort of lost touch. But I think it was a reputation of having good players on my albums. And then when I moved back to San Francisco after the 80s, I was able to get good musicians because in San Francisco is where I really made a name for myself, and so people wanted to play with me because I had a name in San Francisco. But I also in London, when I had was touring bands. I don't know if you've heard of Temple Tudor, Eddie Temple and Temple Tudor.
Ed was
But
just on a little while ago, as a matter of fact, a few weeks ago.
Oh, I love him. He very kindly let me use his band to tour with. So I also toured with Temple Tudor in Japan, and that was really, really fun. Those guys are hilarious and really great players. And yeah, I agree with you. I've lucked out and had really great musicians.
As a matter of fact, Edward Tudor Pole has a new. Well, he worked with a band in Norway, a bunch of guys and a lady, and they call themselves the Tenpole Tudor Vikings. Their new album is out. I believe it's either out now or it's going to come out in just a little bit.
Oh, I gotta get it. I love Eddie Temple. He's so funny and so smart. He's also a great actor. He's just an all around wonderful performer. He's great.
And here's a cheap plug for me. For those of you listening at home, if you haven't heard the interview, you can hear it on the website, revengeofthe80sradio.com, iTunes, Google Play, and of course, our YouTube channel, Revenge of the 80s Radio. All right? Enough about me and the interviews. I had to stick that in. Pearl Harbour is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. This is Pearl Harbour's show. Let's get into a couple years after that last solo album. You went into acting and comedy.
I did a little bit. Let's see. I moved back to San Francisco in 1988 and put a band together, and let's see here, and we played around till 1995, and then I moved to Los Angeles in 1996, and that's when I was pursuing my comedy acting career, sort of. It didn't really go anywhere, but I attended the Groundling School, which is really great. It's where a lot of famous comedians come from there. And so that was a great experience. It was not easy trying to make it in Los Angeles because there's just so many talented people there, and I was never really that successful my whole time living in Los Angeles, but I did have a ball, so I will give it that. I had a great band there too, and we played at all the local clubs all the time, and that was really fun. Had a really good following, and I was in lots of music videos, other people's music videos, because I had a talent agent, and so I used to audition for all these films, and at the same time, had to make extra money by being in other people's music videos. But that also was fun. So.
Yeah, you got to do your own and other people's videos. You were all over the musical spectrum, which reminds me, I got to ask you this. Pearl Harbour with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Pearl, what got you into country music?
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, I did grow up in Germany, and we listened to AFN, American Forces Network, and I loved Dolly Parton, and so did my father. So I listened to because they had an hour of country music every day, and I always listened to that. And I also really liked all the really old school country songs, like George Jones, Hank Williams Sr., Tammy Wynette, and Loretta Lynn. I just loved singing those songs because they were all storytelling, and I also thought that they all had a sense of humor, and I just love the simplicity and the storytelling aspect of country music, and I still do. I don't like modern country music, but have a giant collection of old
Right,
country
real
records.
real country music, not the crossover stuff you hear, the new pop here. You've been listening to the last
Right, right.
decades.
Not to say that those folks aren't good. It's
No, they're
just not my
talented. They're
cup of
very
tea.
talented. It's just that a lot
Uh-huh.
of times the genre changed a little bit. Although there is still a lot of traditional country out there, you just don't get to hear it that often. You,
Right,
now,
right.
Pearl, you did get into handbag design in the middle of all of this as well. I found that interesting.
I did that. I did that in 2014. I'm a collector of many things, almost everything from the 50s. So I have all 50s furniture, 50s and 60s record collection, 50s and 60s clothing, and handbags. And I had hundreds of handbags from all my years of thrift shopping, because I started thrift shopping in the 70s, and that's when everything was 10 cents or a quarter. So I had hundreds of pairs of shoes and hundreds of handbags. And then all my handbags started falling apart because, anything really old, if you use it a lot, the leather wears out, the vinyl cracks, whatever. And so I just had it in my head that a lot of people would like to buy a vintage looking new handbag. And so I had a handbag collection called Pearl Harbour handbags, and they were all inspired by uh, 50s and 60s handbags that I had. But I had them handmade downtown Los Angeles because I was really big on made in the USA, and I wanted to, support the local downtown factories and all that kind of stuff. So as it happened, the handbags were incredibly expensive. They cost handbag cost me a couple $100 to make, and we're talking a few $100 in some instances. So the handbags were very expensive. They range from probably like $700 to $1,000, and most people, including myself, couldn't afford that. But I did think that people, with money, ladies with money
Yeah.
and taste and style would like them, but not so, not so. I just soon discovered that ladies with money who were willing to spend $1,000 on a handbag wanted a label. They wanted a Gucci or a Pucci or a Fendi or a Chanel or whatever. They wanted the label. So I tried, but was not successful. So I folded the company in 2017 before I moved back to the Bay Area.
I couldn't see why anybody wouldn't want a harbor. That would have been really nice. I'd walk around Manhattan, see these ladies saying, "Look at my new harbor. It's beautiful." That's what you have to do next
I
time.
actually went to Manhattan because I'm friends with Simon Doonan, who is not only has he written some incredible books, but he also is the creative director of Barney's, and Barney's is famous for having a whole floor of handbags. And so I tried to get my handbags in Barney's, and they're the ones who really told me, nah, they thought my handbags were incredible, but they said ladies who shop here want labels. So, that was the end of that too, because that was my dream, was all the fancy ladies who dress in Manhattan carrying a Pearl Harbor handbag, but
uh,
it
I
didn't happen.
I know nothing about fashion except for what not to do, so I'll have to defer if that's the case too. Pearl Harbor, I understand you're working on another new project. This is a rather interesting one, though.
Yeah, I've decided to retire from rock and roll because I am in my 60s now, and I've been doing rock and roll for so many years that I wanted to try something new. So I'm working on a funk project with George Clinton's old guitar player. Well, she played with him for many years, but he obviously, anybody who knows anything about George Clinton knows that he has had a whole slew of guitar players throughout all of his live performances and recordings. But I'm working with a woman named Shauna Hall, and she was the original guitar player for Four Non Blondes, and then she went on to work with George Clinton. So she's really great. So we're writing funk songs now, and it's really fun. I've just begun because I've only been back in the Bay Area for just over a year, and it's pretty time-consuming writing songs. But I hope to be out playing before the end of the year with my new funk project. So hopefully that'll be really fun.
We're looking forward to hearing the finished product from that project, Pearl, and we appreciate you coming on with us. But Pearl, as we mentioned before, the 1980 Pearl Harbor and the Explosions album, the self-titled one, has been re-released very recently. What do you think about the renewed interest in your music?
Well, I'm hoping that the young folks who listen to your radio station, it will spark some interest with them. The people who are my age, I'm not so sure really, because if they are fans of Pearl Harbor and the Explosions, they probably already own the record. And then if they're otherwise, a lot of people my age aren't going to shows or buying records anymore. So I'm not really so sure, but the beauty and happiness of re-releasing this album is that we got back our copyright control from Warner Brothers, so we now own all the rights to the music, and so that's why we're re-releasing it, is because it belongs to us now. So it's it's a really exciting adventure for us to own the rights to all your songs again, and so that's kind of the reason why we did just re-release it, and I hope that it attracts interest. To be honest, I'm not expecting anything, but I hope that people like it and buy it. There's lots of tracks, bonus tracks on there that are not on the original album. So if there's any hardcore Pearl Harbor and the Explosions fans, perhaps they'll buy it because of that. But to be honest, Chris, I'm not expecting a lot, hoping for the best and not expecting much.
Also, people want to hear, though. They want to hear the bonus track, something extra, something they didn't get from the first album. Also, holding that CD and holding that vinyl record is always to me, it's a lot more real. I actually like that better than just downloading music. Although, again, downloading music's convenient as well, and those who love to download can do that with the new album too. And again, the rights have been retained by the actual group this time, so the artist gets the money, and that's a good thing.
Yes, I agree.
Pearl Harbor, thank you again for being with us on Revenge of the 80s Radio.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was really fun speaking with you, Chris, and I hope all your listeners go out there and buy the new Pearl Harbor and the Explosions release on Blixer Records. And it was released April 12th.
And keep an eye out for the new project you're working on, and catch up with Pearl on her website, pearlharbormusic.com. That's pearlharbormusic.com. Pearl, let's play another one of your solo tracks, Trouble, from 1995's Here Comes Trouble on Revenge of the 80s Radio.